Hi, and welcome to the 17th video in our C# for Beginner tutorial series. In the last video, we took a look at arrays and how to actually loop through them. So today we're going to be taking a look at multi-dimensional arrays. So we're going to be taking a look more specifically at 2D and 3D arrays, since those are probably going to be the most likely that you're going to be working with in the multi-dimensional array space. But you can definitely have a lot more than 3D. You can definitely work in the 4D and beyond. But we're going to be mostly focusing on 2D and 3D. And for the looping through them, we're going to be mostly focusing on the two-dimensional arrays because we're going to be working a little bit with two-dimensional arrays a little bit later on. We're going to be making a project and using two-dimensional arrays. So let's actually go ahead and let's get started. So the first thing that we need to know how to do is create our multi-dimensional arrays. So we're going to start with the 2D array. So the first thing that we're going to do, very similar to an array, we're going to call our int because it's going to be an integer array. It's going to be a two-dimensional integer array. So we're going to do an int square bracket, and in the middle of the square brackets, we're going to put a comma. And that's going to designate that we have 1 and 2, so it's a two-dimensional array. And we are going to name this, let's name it int 2D array. And we are going to make that equal to a new int square bracket, comma, closing square bracket. And we're going to go ahead and we're actually going to create the array directly in line here. So we're going to do an open and closing curly bracket. As we know, that's the C# notation for creating an array. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to do another open and closing square curly bracket. So we are putting an array inside of an array. So that in terms makes it a two-dimensional array. And then we're going to put the numbers 1, 2, and 3. And we're going to go ahead and put a comma here. And then our second one, we're going to put 4, 5, 6. And then we're going to put another comma and then another row here. So another array. And we're going to put 7, 8, 9. And then we're going to put our semicolon at the end here. So here we have our two-dimensional array. Now you might be wondering how we access these elements. Now, the way that we access them is actually very similar to a regular array. So what we used to do for a regular array would have been like array, square bracket, and then we would put the index here of 2 to get the third element because we are starting at a 0-based index. So for the 2D array, it is actually very, very similar. So let's actually show off how to get the number 4 here. So what we're going to do is we're just going to do a console.writeLine, and let's do int 2D array. And for the 4 here, so in the first array, so in the first dimension here, it is going to be the second element. So we're going to put 1. And then for number 4, it is the first element. So we're going to put 0. And let's go ahead and just put our semicolon here. And once we actually start that, so here we have the number 4. So if we actually just go ahead and copy this line a few more times, so let's just comment this out here. So we have 4. So let's do the number 8. So number 8 would be 2 because it is the third array. So the third item, so that's going to be number 2, starting at a 0, 1, 2. And then let's grab 9. So that is also going to be 0, 1, 2. So that would be a 2, 2. And that should be 9. And then the first element of the first array, that is going to be 0, 0. And that is going to be 1. So let's go ahead and let's actually just take a look, make sure that we are correct here. So there we have it. We have 4, 9, and 1. So it definitely does get quite a lot easier once you're used to this. And we're actually going to be using a very similar example of a two-dimensional array here later on in our project. We are going to create a console-based tic-tac-toe application that you can play with 2 players. So this two-dimensional array of a 3x3 will definitely come in handy later on. So you might want to keep that in mind and think about that with our next few things that we're going to cover. So now we still have to cover three-dimensional arrays. So very similarly to actually the two-dimensional arrays, we're going to do a integer, and then we're going to do our open square bracket. And you probably guessed we're going to put 3 commas this time. We're going to name it int 3D array, and we are going to call that a new int square bracket, comma, comma. And once again, we're just going to put our curly brackets here. So as you probably guessed it, this is going to be an array inside of an array inside of an array. So they definitely get quite confusing the further you go on, but they are fairly easy to get used to once you start working with them more and more. So we have our first array here, so we're going to create our first array. So this is going to be our second dimension here. And then we are going to go ahead and we're going to create another array. And we are going to put elements 1 and 2 here. And let's go ahead and let's put a comma. And let's do 3, 4. And then we're going to put a comma after this one here. And let's create a other second dimension here. And then in the third dimension, we are going to go ahead and put 5 and 6. Then comma. And let's go ahead and yes, that should be good. And then a 7, 8, and then let's put our semicolon here. Yeah, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That should be a good example for us. All right, so let's practice selecting items in here. So let's do our console.writeLine. And let's do this together here. So if we do int 3D array, as you probably guessed it, we're going to have a very similar example here of just 0, 0, 0. And that should select our 1 here. So let's just try that out. So as we can see, let's actually just add a little bit of a separator here. Let's do console.writeLine and let's mark this 2D array. And let's go and let's put the 3D array here so we know where we're starting. All right, so 3D array, we have it as 1 because it is 0, 0, 0. So let's see how we can kind of figure that out. So the first number is actually going to be this array here. So we have at 0, and then we're going to be at 0 again. So it's going to be the first element, and then the first element inside. So if we want to select this 5, actually let's select 6 here. So let's do that together. So for number 6, we are going to be selecting the second element in the first selection here. And then we're going to be selecting the first element in the second level. So that's going to stay a 0. And then the 6 is the second element in that array. So it's going to be 1, 0, 1, and that should be 6. And there we have it. We have 6 here. Well, that is how you would select items in the three-dimensional arrays. So now we know how to create 2D arrays, 3D arrays, and we know how to actually go ahead and fetch one of those items to display to the screen, or we can also edit them. As we've seen, arrays are fully mutable, so we can take a position and completely change it. Now, let's say if we are maybe asking the user to insert an array and we don't necessarily know how many dimensions it has, we can actually get that through code. So let's actually just do another separator here. Let's do a console.writeLine dimensions. All right, and then let's go ahead and let's just write the dimensions of our 2D array here. So let's do a console dot right line. Now to get the dimensions, it's actually just int 2D array and then a dot. And then in here, there's going to be what's called a rank. And that will actually get the number of dimensions. And actually, you could probably make it out here. There is some small text on the screen. It says gets the rank number of dimensions of the array. For example, a one-dimensional array returns 1, a two-dimensional array returns 2, and so on. So if we do this here for our two-dimensional array, and we will do the exact same thing here for our third dimensional array. Now, what would you expect to see as the output in our dimensions here? We get 2 and 3 because they are respectively a two-dimensional array and three-dimensional array. So you could potentially verify to see how many dimensions are in an array to determine how to parse that array later on if your code has to parse it. If it's a user inputted array, there is ways to determine how deep or how many dimensions an array actually has. So now that we've learned how to create them, we've learned how to pick items, and we've learned how to determine how many dimensions are in an array, we still have to actually go ahead and parse them. So I will cover the 2D array because it's really the same thing with the three-dimensional arrays. You're just adding an extra for loop. And for the first method that I'm going to be showing you, it is the exact same way. So I'm going to be showing you two ways to loop through multi-dimensional arrays. Both of them are very, very good. I actually prefer the second method. It's a little bit more complex to write out, but it gives you a lot more flexibility with what you can do with it. So let's actually go ahead and let's get started. So I'm once again just going to go ahead and create another console write line, and we are going to say a for each loop here. And let's go ahead and let's just do a new line here. So you will see why we're doing a new line very, very shortly. All right, so let's loop through the arrays using a for each loop. So we've already seen that for a regular array, but you can actually use the for each loop for multi-dimensional arrays. So let's actually do a for each int I in int 2D array, and let's open and close curly bracket, and let's do a console dot write, and we are going to write out I. And if we go ahead and run this here, as you can, oh, actually we don't need the end because we're doing a write line. So let's actually just rerun this here so it looks a little bit nicer. So here we have our code. Now, as we can see with the for each loop, we do get all of our items in our two-dimensional array. And if I actually just swapped this out to the int 3D, we will see that we get all of our items in our three-dimensional array. So the for each loop is very, very easy. You write it the same way for one-dimensional, two-dimensional, and three-dimensional arrays. It never changes. Now, the only thing that really affects this for each loop is you don't actually have access directly to the value in the array. This will just be a copy that gets copied into a temporary memory space. So if you wanted to do a, let's say I equals 10, as we can see, it is cannot assign to I because it is a for each iterable variable. So you actually cannot change the iterable variable in a for each loop. So it's very good if you just want to display out the array, like if you're just trying to print out the two-dimensional, three-dimensional, or one-dimensional array to the screen, it is a great, great option for printing out. Now, if there's ever any type of modifications or any complex code that you would want to write, like let's say you are writing, I'm going to use our next project for an example, a tic-tac-toe script, and you needed to detect all the boxes beside it. So you're in tic-tac-toe, you're going to be checking horizontally, vertically, and diagonally to see if there's a match on the symbol. with the for each loop, it becomes much harder, if not, I would want to say almost impossible to really detect it without having very, very complex code potentially. But with nested for loops, it becomes very, very easy. So let's actually look at nested for loops now. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is how to write our for loop for two-dimensional arrays. So as we've seen before, we've seen for loops as for int I equals 0. We initiate our counter variable. I would typically be int 2D array dot length. Now the only thing is with length here, we are going to see that we actually get some curly bracket, some red code here. So we can do a dot length. But as we are going to see, if we just do a console dot write line and let's print out I here, and let's just do our loop here. Let's do this a new line. And let's do a nested for loop. And let's see what this looks like. Oh, so actually we get an error. Oh, I am missing my semicolon here and semicolon here, actually. So let's actually go ahead and let's run this. So as we are going to see, in our nested for loop, we get 0, for our counter anyways, we get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now this is going to be a problem because we know to access it, we actually need to do a 1, 0, and we actually don't ever get a value bigger than 2. So we need to get the length of each row and the length of the amount of rows. So for rows and columns. So if we do I is going to be our first set here. So it's going to be the length of the first dimension. So the way that we actually do that here is actually going to be int get length, and you specify the dimension here. So our dimension is going to be 0, again, because we are in a zero-based index. So the first dimension is 0. And now if we actually look at this, we are going to see that we only get 0, 1, and 2, which is going to be 0, 1, and 2. So now we need to actually nest this for loop here. So an easy way to do that is just to copy paste that for loop, and we're just going to change our second counter to a j, and we need to actually change our get length here from the first dimension to the second dimension. And let's go ahead and let's write out in an interpolated string here, let's write out I and then j. So here we should actually get all of our possible options. So if we look at that here now, we get 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 2, 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 0, 2, 1, and 2, 2. That actually looks like it's going to actually work. So now what we would need to do is actually just put in our int 2D array here and our square bracket, and we're going to put I, comma, j. And if we run this code here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So if we just do the two-dimensional arrays, we actually just do this right here, so they will look exactly identical. So as you can see, the for each loop, we have 1 through 9, and the nested for loop, we also have 1 through 9. So that is perfect. And the awesome thing that you can imagine with these nested for loops is you can actually change the value. So if we actually went ahead and did int 2D array, actually we're going to print it out twice. So we're going to print it out, and then we're going to do int 2D array, and we are going to say I j equals int 2D array I comma j times, and we're going to times it itself. So we're going to square every number, and then all we're going to do is we are going to display it again, and that time we're just going to leave it as is, and we just have to do that. So if we actually loop through it here, oops, and nested for loop 2. Okay, perfect. So here we actually have it. So it's kind of hard to read the numbers here. So we have our for each loop 1 through 9, our nested for loop 1 through 9 again, and then we have our nested for loop 2 after we've squared all the numbers. So we can see we have 1, which 1 squared is just 1, 2 squared is 4, 3 squared is 9, 4 squared is 16, 5 squared is 25, 6 squared is 36. So a little bit easier to read here would actually be if I interpolated that string here. And let's just go ahead and let's just put a comma at the end here. So if we actually loop through that here, so we have 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, 49, 64, and 81, which is the square of all the numbers. So as you can see, with the nested for loops, there is a lot of power that you can do with displaying, with modifying, and of course, you can have some if statements in here to check maybe the item or the neighbor beside it or underneath it, and just see if there's any type of matches, or if you have like a maze, maybe find the path in the maze to know where to go next. With two-dimensional arrays, it is very, very endless and very fun to create some different games like chess or tic-tac-toe and be able to actually check for winning situations. We are going to be taking a look at tic-tac-toe very soon, so make sure to keep an eye out for that video. But that is basically it for multi-dimensional arrays. We've learned how to create them, how to get items within the multi-dimensions, how to detect what dimension an array is part of, and also how to loop through them with the for each and nested for loops. As you can imagine, for three-dimensional arrays, you would just add an extra for loop and another counter, and just that list just goes on for as many dimensions as you would go. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys have any questions or comments, please let me know down below. And if you guys have a question that I think a lot of people would benefit from, I will definitely create a video on it. If it's a little bit more specific, I will answer you directly. Also, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and that like button, and also hit that notification bell to be notified when the next video comes out. I will see you guys on the next video.